Salofalava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susanna Srisuki. Coming up.
I'm scared. I don't want to leave my brother.
After a decades-long battle with immigration, a Tongan family has been granted a reprieve. Also, asylum seekers in Nauru share their lived experiences and...
What is it that you intend to do? How are you going to keep us safe?
The people of Guam have been given an extension to submit feedback on missile testing. A Tongan family fighting to keep their aunt in New Zealand has been granted a reprieve. Loasi Latu and her husband have lived in New Zealand for decades as overstayers and were told they had to leave the country voluntarily. However, Latu is a carer for her brother Viliami, who is a New Zealand resident and needs 24/7 support for his intellectual disability and epilepsy.
New Zealand is my home. I'm scared. I don't want to leave my brother.
Associate Minister of Immigration Chris Pink has now granted a 5-year temporary visa for them. I spoke with Karina Kaufusi, the niece of Loasi Latu, and began by asking what was her reaction towards the news.
When we first heard, we're just all really exhausted, and it's been a really stressful time and a lot of sleepless nights for my family. So we're all just so tired, but we're just so grateful, and we feel a lot of love from our community and the wider public who came in to bat for us. And so, yeah, a bit of relief. It's a bit of breathing space because, it's not the end. We don't have permanent residency, but it is a step in the right direction for us, and it just gives us time to work towards a long-term solution.
How is Loasi feeling about it herself?
Oh, she's just so grateful. She's super relieved. She feels safe, and she's just happy that she's able to kind of continue on her day and continue to look after her brother.
What do you think was the ultimatum that convinced the Associate Immigration Minister to grant the reprieve?
Definitely public support. If it was just us fighting, we wouldn't be here where we are today, but because so many people came in to bat for us, for example, Honourable Minister Phil Twyford, Ricardo Mendes March, all the community heroes and everyday people, we were able to make noise and get our voice heard and make the Minister personally review our case.
So just a bit of context, how long have you been fighting for this?
So about 18 months ago, we had submitted a special direction to the Minister, and earlier this year, unfortunately, it was declined, and since then we'd gathered all the new information, the economic report, the specialist doctor reports, a whole bunch of information, and we had sent it through to the Minister to review. So it's been, 18 months, a long journey.
And where to from here, Katrina? I know this is a temporary 5-year visa, but is that enough time for you to apply for permanent residency?
Yeah, it gives us options. It gives us time to talk to Immigration New Zealand, talk to our lawyers, and work out what the next steps are for a long-term solution.
Around 100 asylum seekers are again being held in Australia's offshore processing centre in Nauru after numbers dropped to 0 in June last year. Mohammed Bashir Ajub from Pakistan is being housed in Regional Processing Centre 1, or RPC1. Joining me is Caleb Fotheringham, who was there. Kia ora, Caleb. What's life like for asylum seekers on Nauru?
Kia ora, Sana. So it really depends who you talk to. I spoke to the president. We managed to fire a few questions away to him, and he would say that their life is actually pretty good. They've got everything that they need in terms of healthcare. Everything is provided for them, and all their needs are met. And interestingly, I actually also managed to ask one of the locals, and they had a similar position to the president. They thought the asylum seekers' lives were pretty good. They even said that in some instances, the asylum seekers were living better lives than the locals because I don't know if this is true, but at least I was told by this local man that they had AC and most of the locals didn't have air conditioning. So it was interesting getting that perspective. But really, if you talk to the asylum seekers themselves, especially on Regional Processing Centre 1 or RPC 1, they would say that it's not that great. One man that I spoke to, especially, he said that the healthcare is totally inadequate, and that's for physical needs. So he had requested by the GP to see a specialist 3 times for his eye because he said his eyesight was getting worse and worse and worse. And he didn't get to see a specialist. The GP just gave him drops, which he said did absolutely nothing. And then on the other side of that, he said that the mental health support is also very inadequate. Now, you've got to remember that these people, they have come from extremely traumatic situations. The person that I spoke to said that he was tortured and kidnapped when he was in Pakistan. So that for context, I mean, they really need good mental health services, and that's coming from this man who actually had some really good mental health services when he was in Australia because he was there for a period as well. And I spoke to the people in the community, the asylum seekers in the community as well, because there's a few of them there. And overall, they seemed actually okay with how they were treated. Their main issue was that they felt like they were not getting enough money from the Australian government. So that was 460 Australian dollars that they said they had received. I haven't verified that, but that's at least what they have told me. And they said that is incredibly, incredibly hard to live on. It's just not enough for them. So that's their main concern, is just the amount of money that they've been given. But in terms of life inside the community, they said it is okay. Now, another really, really big thing in RPC1 is that they take away people's mobile phones, and they actually do that before they actually get to Nauru. They do that in Australia, and they were told that that was for security reasons. And it may seem like a bit of a luxury, a smartphone, but the really big reason why it's necessary is because asylum seekers, that's how they can keep people accountable. It's got a camera on it. So if something's going bad, they can film it, they can take photos, they can send it to people like you and I who can write about it. Without that, there's just not the same evidence that anything's going wrong. Another reason is WhatsApp. It's just far easier to communicate. That's what a lot of the lawyers use to communicate with their clients in Nauru. So that's another big aspect to it. And yeah, so the smartphone thing's a big issue as well.
What was your experience like as a journalist there?
It was clear from the onset that we weren't really wanted. Visas took a while to be processed, and we managed to get on the flight, thankfully, because I believe we were with Winston Peters, of course, Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, Minister of Foreign Affairs. And normally for journalists, you have to pay $8,000 for the visa for the visa application fee, and that's 8,000 Australian. And thankfully, we did not have to do that. But when we were on the island, it was clear that the government was very standoffish. Questions, they had to be pre-approved by President Adiang before we asked them to asked him the questions, and we managed to get a few. That was restricted to 2 questions each, by the way. So there was only 4 questions. And when I managed to find the local guy who drove me around the island, he was also seriously concerned. And I won't say what he was concerned about because it might give away his identity, but he was really concerned. And from my point of view, it seemed like his concerns were valid, that he would be identified with the journalist. So he told me, if anybody asks, you're a tourist, you are hitchhiking, and that is why you're in the car. When we went up to the detention centres, because that was one of the things I wanted to do, take photos of the detention centres, he kept driving. He really didn't want me to step out of the car, and rightfully so. He just didn't want to be seen with a journalist. I mean, it would seem very suspicious. And that's probably that's the main reason why a lot of my photos are really blurry, just because we had to keep driving the whole way through. And then when we were looking for asylum seekers in the community, we first drove past a security guard, and he just kept driving, and he said, we can't pull over. I didn't recognize it was a security guard at first, but he's like, we can't go there when there's the security guard there. And then we had to loop around, and then and then the security guard was gone. So then we could actually do the interview with the asylum seekers. The asylum seekers themselves, funny enough, when I actually interviewed them, they were very relaxed. They even let me take photos of them. They were absolutely fine with being named. And that was the same with Muhammad, who I spoke to in RPC1. Also, keeping in mind with how journalists are treated, there's a history of journalists not being treated all that well in Nauru. Of course, in 2018, Barbara Drever, she was arrested, and that was during the Pacific Islands Forum. That was a different time, to be fair, and tensions were a lot higher. There was a lot more refugees, but it still is obvious that there's a bit of a hangover from when there was a lot of asylum seekers on the island, and the Nauru government really didn't want people to talk to them.
But even with you not being able to take proper photos of the detention center, that's still intense. So where are the asylum seekers going to go?
Yeah, it was very intense. But where the asylum seekers are going to go, it's super unclear. New Zealand made an arrangement with Australia in 2022 to take 450 refugees in 3 years. So that would finish in June 2025. And New Zealand hasn't reached that number. So you could think that, well, New Zealand will take them because they have made this promise to Australia. But the government said that the new arrivals, so there were no asylum seekers last year on June, all the asylum seekers left last year on Nauru, and then they just all got taken by New Zealand, and I believe some went to Canada and maybe the States. And now in September, new arrivals started coming again. But the government said that those people, the new arrivals, which is about 100 of them at the moment, they do not fall into this agreement. So New Zealand is not responsible for taking them. And Australia as well, they have made it very, very clear that they are not going to take anybody. In 2013, they said that anybody who comes on boat will not be able to permanently settle in Australia. So, to be frank, Sana, I have absolutely no idea who's going to take these asylum seekers.
Meitaki Caleb, and safe travels home. And for those of you interested in Nauru, we'll have a full report from Caleb on the visits and the Australian-run detention centres in Nauru in our next Pacific Waves show. The University of Auckland has launched a program to help ensure hospitals in Pacific Island countries are more aware of risks they face from cyclones and other extreme weather. The risks for various hospitals in Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Kiribati and Tonga are being modelled to show what threats they face up to the end of the century and to isolate possible new locations. Project leader, climate scientist Dr. Michelle McChrystal told Don Wiseman more about it.
There's a lot of different inputs into why we started this project and why it was an interesting project, in that these South Pacific islands are really underrepresented in a lot of climate model simulations because they're such small islands that a lot of the global climate models actually aren't able to, as it were, see them in the climate models. So a lot of future projections, of which there are very limited information, aren't always capturing these islands. So a lot of the future projections really aren't specific to these islands in all kind of capacities. Like we do have some future projections and stuff, but because the models aren't capturing them well enough, these projections aren't maybe the most robust. And these islands are also impacted a lot by tropical cyclones. So they're in the path of these tropical cyclones in the South Pacific. That causes irreparable damage to a lot of the health infrastructure of these islands. So I think it's the example of a hospital, Nui, in Tonga had to get relocated because it was badly affected by a tropical cyclone. I think back in 2014, the name of it has escaped me, the name of that.
Yes, I think that was Ian. What you're doing is showing them the degree of threat projected over the rest of the century, but also are you suggesting to them places where they might go?
Well, that's kind of the aim of it. It's first of all to sort of show what hospitals are most at risk from different, whether it's from tropical cyclones or other extreme events such as extreme precipitation or even extreme heat as well. We're looking a little bit into this, but it is to sort of show which hospitals are most at risk from the impact of tropical cyclone landfall in the future and the associated impacts of that, whether it be wind and rain, as I've said, and to sort of show maybe which hospitals are most at risk. And based on the data that we have, like we could also run it to look at other latitudes and longitudes across islands to see which would be the next best place in which hospitals could be relocated towards. It's not something we're doing directly, but we have the capability of doing that. So the first step would be to assess which hospitals are most at risk and which hospitals really need to have this data and this understanding of how they will be impacted by these tropical cyclones. And then the next step could be to assess what locations would be best equipped to house a hospital that's away from these effects of tropical cyclones.
How are you acquiring the information?
So we have acquired the different latitudes and longitudes of the hospitals based on the South Pacific community. They have all this information about the locations of where the hospital sites are. So we work directly with people at SPC, and they have links with health facilities and health clinics all across the islands in the South Pacific. So we've got data from them. And then we were also using global climate model, but high resolution global climate models to pinpoint the different latitude and longitudes of these hospital sites. But we're trying to take this a step further, and we're creating our own model to look at tropical cyclones and to look at the sort of the variability of risk between now sort of mid-century and into the end of the century, and look at the different range of impacts that will happen based on the change in how tropical cyclones might change in the future, where the genesis region is in the South Pacific, and how, if we know how that changes, then we can sort of see the range of variability of impacts in the future for the different locations across the South Pacific. So it's very specific to this region. It's much more tailored to the South Pacific and to the different hospital regions. So we're trying to pinpoint it to a much more localized impact rather than just general, it's going to get worse by X amount, but actually for that site specific region, that we can say we have this range of variability out by 2050 or 2100 based on how things will change in the tropical cyclogenesis, so where tropical cyclones form, and how that then will impact, say, on these different specific regions.
How many hospitals do you know yet?
How many hospitals? I think at the minute we are assessing around about 40 hospitals. We have some more data for more, but at the minute, that's what we're working at the minute, but there is the capacity to increase this, because it can be any site. So if we have any related data to any hospital site, any health clinic as well, it won't necessarily only be for hospitals, but it can be any health clinic or any facility that is interested in this. In the future, we can make this data available. That's the point of the project, is to make it online, that it's accessible to other people. And it will just be a case of, for this specific site, and it can be for anything, what might be the changes in the future. So I say at the minute, we are focusing on the sort of 40 hospital sites data that we have, but this is open and amenable to any other facility that wants it, or even any other industry.
And the university is able to do this because it's got a grant from an organisation called Climate Change AI. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so me and my collaborator, Chris Horvat, wrote this project along with other collaborators, I should say, as well, within the South Pacific, and with other doctors and medical people that are interested in this kind of work, that have worked in these Pacific islands as well. We wrote this grant to Climate Change AI to do this project, and this is using artificial intelligence as well. So as I've said, and I've kind of explained the programme a little bit, that we assess how tropical cyclones form, how that will change into the future, and the impact that this will have. And usually to run that sort of data, it takes quite a long time to do, but we're trying to speed this process up and do it as an online platform so that anybody can log on to an online platform, which will be the end product. Hopefully by the end of the year, it might spill into next year as well, of course, because these things take a little bit longer usually to get it operational and easy user interface. But it's to create this AI product that will speed up that process and give you data back in a very short period of time, whereas now it might take a couple of days in which to get that information. We're trying to bring that down to matters of minutes or maybe hours or something, but basically to make this process run a lot quicker, to run, this is how we think change, we run different model simulations for how tropical cyclones might form, and then get the information spat out in a much shorter period of time so that it's easily accessible, that people can just say, if we have this change here, what this will mean for our hospital site now and into the future, and maybe look at other alternatives as well. So it's speeding up that process between the input to the output that people really want.
The US Missile Defense Agency has called for a public meeting following major concerns of impacts over long-term missile testing on Guam. The people of Guam have been thrown a lifeline extension to submit feedback on long-term missile testing on the US island territory. The US Missile Defense Agency has granted an extension of 30 days, not the requested 60, for submissions over plans for missile testing twice a year over the next decade from Andersen Air Force Base. There are concerns over disruptions to residents and landowners, let alone risks to their lives, as the military ramps up activity on the island territory. Alicia Foon spoke with former US Congressman and current chair for Pacific Center for Island Security, Robert Underwood, about his hopes for the meeting.
I would like to see an open public discussion. It's not likely we're going to see that. I'm assuming that this will be a typical kind of poster board session in which they'll have, several stations about what they're doing and planned on doing, and they'll have different experts attending to each station. And then you come in and you interact with them station by station. Nobody's saying, what is it that you intend to do? How are you going to keep us safe? In a public forum where there's candid conversation and discussion. Absent that, there's no sense of accountability or no sense of openness or no sense of gauging, the strength of the opposition to it or the strength of the resistance that the Pentagon might give to that opposition. We don't know. That's the nature of this is that this public hearing is unspecified. But I add the cautionary word that in the past, these have taken on what they call scoping meetings, in which case they kind of divide up what they're doing and you go around and you talk to individuals. So it's kind of, opening up a level of transparency, which I believe they either felt was not necessary or they didn't want to do. They didn't want to engage in.
What's the public reaction been like so far? Is there a big turnout to be expected?
Well, absolutely. There's going to be a large turnout. I think in anticipation of that, the legislature might even be holding a public hearing. And that's for them to decide, but I've heard them talk about that, in which they're going to specifically call on the affected landowners to come out and express themselves, because the way that this plan calls for conducting the missile tests and then warning landowners in certain areas not to go to their property. So I think it and without specifying which lands, but we're assuming that there's some lands that are going to be immediately affected, and so the landowners need to be kind of weigh in on how they feel about it.
Do you think the concerns over impacts to landowners and residents will be taken seriously?
Of course, I hope that the plans will be altered or ameliorated in some way. The point is that the way that this has been conducted, I'm relatively sure that they have a whole series of activities, planned activities that they want to perform on Guam, including the enhanced integrated air missile defense system, which is the big item. And in anticipation of that, they must have several movements or several steps along the way. I think what of course is of grave concern is that these steps are being let out one step at a time, in which you get the feeling like you're trying to be overwhelmed by the number of statements being issued, as opposed to saying, this is what we want to do in the totality. What do you think? Where are we going? What do you want? It's not that kind of a conversation at all. A dozen or more steps. We issue these steps out. We ask you to respond. We give you a certain time frame. And the government of Guam has things to do. The Guam legislature has things to do. We don't have a great analytical apparatus in the government of Guam or in Guam society to enable us to deal with this in a coherent and in a way in which people are fully informed. So hence, we in the Pacific Center for Island Security have taken on the responsibility of doing that and putting information in the hands of people. Now, people can do things that there's conversations, there's always conversation. Are there going to be lawsuits filed in anticipation of this? And who's going to file them? Are some activist organizations? So all these things, as the legislature going to pass resolutions one way or another, all of these things are yet to manifest themselves. But of course, the intensity of the frequency of the pronouncements about movements in Guam by the military is creating a great deal of consternation, would be a polite word. Certainly confusion, because we don't know what it is exactly. They introduce these measures in incremental steps in a way that makes them seem by themselves not so harmful, but in the totality of they could be rearranging the way you live your life on a day-to-day basis.
That's Pacific Waves for today. To listen back, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.